Marjorie Harmeier has a lot of friends, and some of them helped her this weekend with the sad job of cleaning out her daughter Ann's apartment. Marjorie is losing hope of ever seeing Ann again.
Each day brings a little less hope, but maybe she's with a group of people, and she may turn up.
This is Ann, 20 years old, went to church regularly, sang and danced, was known as kind and considerate, a junior at college. Ann Harmeier left home September 12th to drive more than 100 miles to the campus of Indiana University, but she never made it here. Her mother found her car abandoned on the road, its doors locked and emergency flasher lights blinking. Since then, the people of Ann's hometown have been trying to find her.
Of course, I've known Ann. I remember when she was born, I knew her parents, her father, long time ago. But this really tops everything.
Ann's small-town neighbors have big city ideas about finding her. They put up billboards along the highway where she was last seen. Volunteers from the university have even been tromping through the woods near where Ann disappeared. Indiana State Police are investigating, too, but the townspeople are following up on the smallest leads, some the police don't bother with. The townspeople are giving posters to cross-country truck drivers to help spread the word. The people here say they won't stop until they find out what happened to Ann. And Marjorie Harmeier can't thank them enough.
Well, I think that's one advantage of living in a small town. Maybe in a city you're another statistic, but this town's fantastic.
This was her last stop on State Road 37 atop Eskew Hill, 2.5 miles north of Martinsville. Here, perhaps because of a morning of frustration with her car trouble, or perhaps because the person who stopped to assist her for some reason seemed familiar, Ann Harmeier, the girl who never got into a car with a stranger, did.
Cambridge City, Indiana. It was on a weekend in September of 1977 that Ann Harmeier was last seen alive. Ann's mother, Marjorie, convinced her only child to not start back to Indiana University until the morning of September 12th. Her mother said she would be much safer in the daylight hours. As parents, that's all we want, to keep our children safe. It's here on Indiana State Road 37 that Ann's car broke down, and a depraved executioner stopped to offer her a ride. Here, on a busy 4-lane highway in broad daylight, he took 20-year-old co-ed Ann Harmeier, and without an ounce of mercy, he viciously ended her life. We all know the rules of road safety if our car breaks down, but sometimes we forget to take a deep breath. Sometimes we're in such a hurry to get to our destination that we feel compelled to do something dangerous out of desperation. Ann knew that her first class that morning started at 10:30. She didn't want to be late, as she was known for her punctuality. Without thinking, Ann got out of her car after pulling onto a shoulder. She stood leaning against it. People remembered seeing her that morning. Sadly, no one saw the opportunistic killer swooping in to take advantage of the situation. Before we move into the tragic details of events that morning, let's go back to Cambridge City, Indiana, to learn more about Ann and what led to her abduction and murder. Ann was very close to her mother. It was just the two of them after Ann's father died when she was just 4 years old. Marjorie raised her daughter alone while teaching at the local elementary and high schools. Perhaps it was that love of music that inspired Ann to major in drama at Indiana University. She had a gift for singing and performed locally at community events. Performing before an audience gave her the confidence to expand her talents to include acting. It was a proud moment when she landed a supporting role in a university musical. Ann's life seemed to be going just as she had planned, but something inside gave way to apprehension. Ann once told her mother that her life was too good to be true and surely couldn't last. She even went so far as to ask a family friend, Reverend Rose Tall, to look after her mother if anything happened. On the weekend of September 10th, Ann returned home for a visit as she had many times before. She loved her home in Cambridge City and spending time with her mother. When it had been decided that she would leave the morning of September 12th, she loaded her clothes and books into her car and headed back to Bloomington, which was 150 miles away. Somewhere between Cambridge City and Bloomington, Ann developed car trouble stemming from what mechanics would later describe as a faulty thermostat. Ann had stopped at several service stations along the way to refill her radiator. She was last spotted standing outside her disabled car on Indiana 37. Ann was just 20 miles from the IU campus. Ann had promised to make 2 phone calls once she made it safely back to campus. One call was to her mother as soon as she arrived, and the other was to her friend Reverend Tall later that evening. Of course, the calls would never come. Marjorie phoned her daughter's campus apartment several times. Each one went unanswered. Reverend Tall also became concerned when Ann didn't call that evening, as she had promised. This wasn't like Ann. Ann was responsible and reliable. When Ann made a promise, she kept it. It had now been 15 hours since anyone had heard from her. Where was Ann? Reverend Tall and Marjorie Harmeier decided to set out and retrace Ann's route back to the campus. It was close to midnight when they found Ann's abandoned car. The rust-colored Pontiac Le Mans was found locked with its emergency lights flashing. Ann's clothing and books were still inside. Marjorie immediately notified authorities that her daughter was missing. As the news broke that Ann had disappeared, the entire community of 2,500 people came together to help with the search. Donations were collected and used to print posters with Ann's picture. Bumper stickers were ordered and searches were organized. Ann's face was seen on billboards from Cambridge City all the way to the campus in Bloomington. The town didn't stop until Ann's story gained national attention. Still, after all their efforts, no trace of Ann could be found. While volunteers were putting up posters and placing bumper stickers on cars, the state police began to release what little information they had on Ann's disappearance. According to police, Ann made several stops at service stations to put water in her radiator on her journey back to the campus. Her car finally gave out about 2 miles north of Martinsville. Police stated that the car's radiator was empty, and they theorized that the engine had overheated, causing it to stall. When asked why Ann's car sat beside a busy 4-lane highway for 15 hours without being noticed by state troopers, Sergeant Donald Gastineau said, "I have no idea." The weeks of not knowing what had become of her daughter started to take a toll on Marjorie. She blamed herself for what happened to Ann. She said that if she and her husband hadn't gone to Indiana University, Ann probably wouldn't have gone there either. Ann would have never been traveling on that road. Desperately trying to hold back her tears, Marjorie went on to say, "I'd rather find Ann and put her with her daddy at the cemetery than not to know." Law enforcement knew that the clock was ticking and the odds of finding Ann alive were slim. Clinging to optimism for Marjorie's sake, they worked around the clock trying to locate the missing 20-year-old. There was only one possible sighting that briefly renewed everyone's hopes. A service station owner in Paragon, Indiana, located on Indiana 67, thought he and his employee had seen Ann on September 12th. The service station was just 6 miles southwest of Martinsville, not far from Ann's abandoned car. Owner Willard Walt said that a 1960 black Ford car with Kentucky plates stopped for gas and snacks at around 12 p.m. Walt went on to say that there were 3 males and 3 females in the car, and no one appeared to be distraught. He said one of the girls was wearing a red Indiana University shirt, and he teased her about wearing an IU shirt in a Kentucky car. Walt said she looked like she was going to say something, and then turned and bought a soda. Walt remembered that the driver got $5 worth of gas and left the station going south on Indiana 67. When questioned further by authorities, Walt's employee, Sam White, said he thought the car was a dark green Chevrolet, and although at first Walt was sure it was Ann that he saw, both men could not say with 100% certainty that it was her. Authorities considered the tip to be another dead end and continued to follow up on other leads. Marjorie was said to have told those investigating the case that she was driving to Paragon to talk to Walt herself. Sergeant Gastineau felt it was just a waste of her time. Although it looked as if the investigation was beginning to stall out, Cambridge City residents remained determined to bring Ann home to Marjorie. And 36 days into the search, they would do just that. Sadly, it wasn't in the way that they had hoped. Ann's body was found by Lawrence Stafford while he was harvesting corn on his 200-acre farm. This map shows where Ann's body was located on County Road 700 East. The perpetrator had only taken her about 4.5 miles down the road from where her car had broken down. In 1977, the area was isolated farmland. Most homes were at least a quarter mile or further apart. Authorities stated at the time that they were not surprised by the location of Ann's body because they thought from the beginning that corn harvesting time would turn up something. Just after 2:30 p.m. on October 17, 1977, authorities entered a cornfield on County Road 700 East. They walked 200 feet in and stared down at the almost nude body of Ann Harmeier. She was laying face up between 2 standing rows of corn over 7 feet high. Ann had a gag in her mouth. Her hands had been tied behind her back with one of her own shoelaces. Ann's blue jeans and panties were pulled down around her ankles. Her bra was torn off. Her IU t-shirt was pulled up around her neck. The 20-year-old co-ed had been strangled by a tourniquet fashioned from her other shoelace and her hairbrush. Dr. Josefino Aguilar, who conducted the autopsy, stated that there was some form of sexual assault based upon the disarray of clothing and position of the body, but Ann's remains were too decomposed, and therefore he could not confirm that she had been assaulted. 10 feet from Ann's body lay the contents of her purse. A billfold, a bank book, and a paper with Ann's name on it were all scattered about. The clothing and jewelry were a match to those that Ann was said to be wearing when she went missing. Fingerprints and dental records were used to make a positive ID. The investigation would prove to be difficult with very little to go on. Investigators were left to ponder if Ann was really in such a hurry to get to class that she naively accepted a stranger's offer to take her to the next town. Or did the perpetrator force her into his car? Was Ann being followed that day? Or was this just a random act of violence? It was a bold move to abduct Ann on a 4-lane highway in broad daylight. All these commuters passing by, and yet no one remembers seeing him take Ann. He drove her to an isolated area just down the highway, as if he were familiar with the area. Was this his first kill, or had he done this many times before? George Huntington, chief of IU Police Department in Bloomington, said this at the time. There is a slim chance of finding the man, although statistically he would be a resident of Morgan, Monroe, or Marion counties. There is a large probability that the man made a U-turn, but my best judgment is that he stopped on the other side of the road and crossed over to offer assistance. It was nothing but opportunity, pure random chance, that she stopped just as a very bad person was coming by, about as though she were hit by lightning. The best advice Chief Huntington could give all the frightened women in the area was, if you ever find yourself stranded, stay in your car. Keep your doors locked at all times. If someone offers assistance, lower your window only enough to be heard and ask for them to call for help. Under no circumstances should you ever get into a stranger's car. As the investigation into Ann's murder quickly began to go cold, here are just a few suspects and details from her case that Indiana State Police were pursuing at the time. 18-year-old Deborah Mayer of Pennsylvania was on her way to visit a friend in Massillon, Ohio, on September 10, 1977. Mayer picked up a hitchhiker, Joseph Mazer of Portland, Oregon. The 23-year-old Mazer was a vagabond with no permanent address. On September 12, the same day Ann was reported missing, authorities were alerted that Mayer never arrived in Massillon, and no one had heard from her after September 10th. On September 23, 1977, Mazer was arrested in Texas while driving Mayer's stolen light green Pinto. Mazer admitted to killing Mayer, and her body was found on October 7, 1977, in a stream in Salt Fork State Park in Ohio. Mayer had been sexually assaulted and strangled with her own jumpsuit. It was reported at the time of Mazer's arrest that a map of Martinsville, Indiana, was in his possession. Authorities were never able to link Mazer to Ann's murder. Authorities had led everyone to believe that Ann's murder was the work of Stephen Judy, a mass murderer and suspected serial killer in Indiana. On April 28, 1979, Terry Chastain was taking her 3 children to the babysitters when Judy motioned for her to pull her car over. Judy told Chastain there was something wrong with her tire and that he would give her and her children a ride to call for help. 21-year-old Chastain was later found sexually assaulted and strangled in White Lick Creek. Her children, 5-year-old Misty, 4-year-old Stephen, and 2-year-old Mark, had been drowned. Judy was arrested and admitted to the murders. He was later executed for the crimes in 1981. Although Judy remained at the top of Indiana State Police suspect list for many years, it was recently discovered that Judy couldn't have murdered Ann because he was in Marion County Jail on September 12, 1977. It's unknown how authorities could have made that mistake. On March 10, 1977, 22-year-old Margaret Ann Hayes disappeared shortly after leaving her apartment near Indiana University. Margaret was taking a break from college and hadn't enrolled in the spring session. At 11 p.m., the 22-year-old left her apartment and walked to buy a pack of cigarettes. Margaret was never seen again. She left behind her clothing, checkbook, extra cash, and eyeglasses. Authorities thought perhaps Hayes' disappearance was somehow linked to Ann's murder. Here are 2 other odd details to note about Ann's case. Upon inspection of Ann's radiator, it was discovered that the thermostat was installed upside down. State Police downplayed its importance, saying it was a common mistake to make, and it was highly doubtful it was in any way related to her murder. On July 27, 1977, Ann's purse was stolen from her car. She had stopped at home to grab a nightgown because she was staying overnight at a friend's house. Ann was only away from her car for less than 5 minutes. Cambridge City Police stated that Ann and her mother lived in a nice suburban neighborhood with very little crime. It was their belief that someone must have been following her that day. The purse contained $80 and her ID. Neighbors sitting in their backyard heard a car speed away when the incident occurred. Cambridge City residents wondered if Ann may have had a stalker. Could this person have deliberately tampered with her car? Again, police downplayed this possibility, but said anything is possible. And so the search for Ann's killer goes on. The evidence collected at the scene was well preserved, and occasionally DNA is uploaded into CODIS to search its database. So far, authorities haven't gotten a hit. Marjorie Harmeier died 5 years after Ann's murder, never knowing who took her daughter's life. Take a good look at Ann Louise Harmeier. The 20-year-old was a good person with so many lovely dreams. Ann had a passion for the theater and could have been a famous Broadway actress. Instead, her life was abruptly ended in a cornfield at the hands of a malicious and vile predator. If you have any information about Ann Harmeier's murder, please contact the Indiana State Police at 317-899-8577 or the Cambridge City Police Department at 765-478-1231. Are you obsessed with true crime content? Subscribe now and join our growing community as we analyze and discuss the details of some truly baffling cold cases. Browse our growing library of cold case investigations and immerse yourself in the mysteries that keep us up at night. Subscribe and join the EOJ community today. All it takes is a click.